Good evening. It is now 6 p.m. and welcome to the Community Development Committee meeting. I am the Chair, Lewis Washington. Today's meeting is being recorded and will be available on the city's website. Thank you to all who are joining us. We'll start with the roll call. Councilmember Watton. Here. I'm here. Councilmember Johnson is here. He took a quick break. And we have Madam Mayor, City Administrator, and Interim Director Davis here. Okay, so we now move to our first item of regular business, which is to approve the agenda items. Any question on the agenda items?
So moved.
All right. Any questions?
Second.
Councilmember Johnson? Okay, sounds good. Okay, so we'll go ahead and approve the agenda items. At this point, at this part of the meeting, sorry, we'll take public comment. If there are any public comments here. Looking around, don't see any public comments. Okay, so we'll going once, going twice. Okay. Now we move to our next agenda item, which is the approval of the minutes dated April 8th, 2025. Are there any questions regarding the minutes for April 8th, 2025?
No objection.
Sounds good. We'll adopt the minutes. Minutes approved. Okay, next on the agenda is a discussion of Agenda Bill AB 25-305, ordinance amending Snoqualmie Municipal Code Title 17.20, retail use requirements in downtown historic district retail overlay zone. And I will turn the meeting over to Interim Director Davis.
Thank you, Chair Washington. Good evening, Council and Mayor. I want to introduce to you, well, I know you've met Andrew Levins before. He was really involved in this process all of last year. And so I thought it would be good to have him come in today in light of our conversation at our last committee meeting and just have him give like some good background and be here to answer questions that you may have around this before we move this forward. So with that, I'll turn it over to Andrew.
Thank you, Director Davis. Like Director Davis mentioned, my name is Andrew Levins. I'm a land use planning consultant that worked with the city to develop and extensively with the Planning Commission to help them develop this recommendation. So I'll try to share my screen here. Let me see if I can. So it's good to be with you here tonight in person. Tonight I wanted to just kind of go over the existing requirements and what's currently in place in the city, and then also discuss the Planning Commission's recommendation for proposed amendments to retail use requirements downtown and in Snoqualmie Ridge in the neighborhood center. And then also discuss a separate but related item that is on the agenda of the CD committee, which is the amendment that would be required to the mixed-use final plan for Snoqualmie Ridge 1 that is necessary in order to enact these changes up on the ridge in the neighborhood center. So today, Chapter 1737 of the Snoqualmie Municipal Code establishes a downtown historic retail use overlay zone. That applies only to the BR1 zone and some other parcels that have since changed zoning since that was initially adopted. But it primarily applies to Railroad Avenue, or I should say it only applies to storefronts facing Railroad Avenue in downtown Snoqualmie.
Oh, sorry, Councilmember Johnson.
Just quick reminder, this is existing, right? Not proposed.
This is existing, yes. This is where establishing our baseline here. So today we have an existing overlay zone that applies to downtown Snoqualmie and only along Railroad Avenue. We have a separate retail district up on the ridge along Center Boulevard Southeast, and that is governed by the Snoqualmie Ridge 1 development standards. These development standards reference Chapter 1737 of the Snoqualmie Municipal Code. And then finally, we have the Snoqualmie Ridge 1 Mixed-Use Final Plan. This is the document that the city adopted back in many years ago when Snoqualmie Ridge 1 was approved. This authorizes the Snoqualmie Ridge 1 development standards and the uses envisioned up on the ridge. And this is a slide that I did not have the opportunity to flesh out before this presentation, just because Director Davis and I were going through, we were discussing potential last-minute additions, but I wanted to review with you what the current definition of retail use is. And there is a specific carve-out in the zoning code for this. It applies in addition to the underlying uses that are already allowed in the BR1 zone. And retail use for the purposes of this chapter means a business primarily characterized by the sale of goods or merchandise to the local public and tourists for personal, household, or business consumption, and rendering of services incidental to the sale of goods. And it goes on at length there, provides examples. By way of illustration, the following are retail uses: general merchandise such as apparel, books, arts and crafts, furniture, and home furnishings, jewelry, convenience stores, restaurants, personal services such as barbershops. The list goes on at length here. I would point out that while the development standards do reference, the Snoqualmie Ridge 1 development standards do reference Chapter 13 or 1737 for most of these requirements, this definition of retail use is largely mirrored in the development standards. So you have a definition of retail use that applies to both the Ridge and downtown. That is almost entirely the same. The only difference that we were able to identify here is banking. On the Ridge, banking uses would be considered retail, whereas downtown it's currently not. That's something that we can consider aligning in the future as part of a community development committee recommendation if the committee should so desire. Let me see, let me go back to my. So that's what we're talking about. We're talking about retail uses in these two districts in the city of Snoqualmie. So within these districts, there is a requirement that a certain percentage of the storefronts be comprised of this narrower definition of retail uses. So up on the Ridge, you have storefronts that only face corner intersections that intersect with Center Boulevard Southeast. This was written and implemented as part of the original Snoqualmie Ridge 1, and it's hyper specific. It only applies to 12 storefronts. But of those 12 storefronts, 100% of them are required to be a true retail use. Currently under the code, if a landlord or a property owner is not able to secure a tenant that proposes a use that's consistent with our retail use definition, if they can demonstrate that their storefront has been vacant for a period of 120 days and that they have advertised it as required by the code, then the city is compelled to approve a waiver from this requirement that relieves them of the obligation to find a retail tenant. And then they can then put any non-retail commercial use in that space. So you could have a medical office building, for example, or a realtor's office, or an office in general. Yes.
Sorry, just a quick question. Can you speak to the test that's applied for this 120 days? Do you have it outlined?
I can pull up the requirements. Let me just switch over back to the municipal code. And so this retail waiver process is identified in the municipal code, and the Snoqualmie Ridge Development Standards refer back to it. So here is the criteria for granting a waiver, and that is that the premise is vacant. The owner has made a good faith effort to lease the premise for a period greater than 120 days to a retail use. That the owner and agent has offered it for lease at market rate, so they're not setting unreasonable lease terms, and that despite these good faith efforts, no tenant that would qualify as a retail use has been able to be secured. And so currently, the process for a retail waiver for a retail waiver approval is that the community development director would review it, and if these criteria can be demonstrated, then the director is compelled to, or directed, I should say, to approve the retail waiver. And then that decision, if they've met these criteria and it's approved, that decision is appealable. The director could also deny it if they find that these criteria have not been met, and that decision is also appealable.
Oh. Would you-
So I have a question, and that is, I understand that our desire is to have more retail, and I can, definitely understand that piece. But if I have a medical office, and this happens, where, say, for instance, I sell my medical practice to another operator, and the landlord's willing for me to assume the remainder of the lease, doesn't that condition already stay in place? And I guess the question is there value that goes with that business staying a medical practice, which is kind of counterintuitive to what we're attempting to do. And the reason why I bring this up is we're going to be changing from just the four corners of the overlay to the entire street. What kind of implication does that have on those existing because if I were to take a medical office and change it to retail use, it goes through a conditional use permit process, I assume. But conversely, if I take a retail space and now I've turned it into a medical space, how does that all play out in this?
I'll take a shot at it.
Yes, city administrator.
I wish the city attorney was there. So my guess is once that waiver's been waived, as long as that occupancy exists, you can't enforce your zoning code on that unit. So if medical takes over a retail space and that lease goes forever, you've lost that retail space forever. And I think that's what this was designed maybe not to encourage. You have very limited retail space, you have very limited industrial space, and you really should protect those. Retail areas need critical mass of customers so that they're all successful. And you don't usually get additional industrial space added to your city over time.
Councilmember Johnson.
Yeah, I guess if I go to a space where I'm expecting I could go to retail, I don't usually go, waltzing into an eye doctor, and then I walk out there and I walk into the dentist office, and then, go one office to the next for all my various needs. Your average person doesn't do that on a weekly basis. So yeah, people are usually willing to drive more for an appointment, for the dentist or what have you. But if they're going to take a leisurely stroll down the street, do some window shopping, then there should be some windows that have things to do shopping in. I did want to point out here that it's a little bit entertaining to me. Some of the copies of documents that they need to show, like newspaper advertisements. I would hope that they would be trying to advertise in places people look, and maybe folks do still look at newspapers when they're looking for spaces to lease. But you notice it doesn't even mention the internet, let alone apps. Um, and,
I would note
what-
that during the planning commission's work on this, on these amendments, prior to them determining that the waiver process would be removed from their recommendation, they did amend that section to include more relevant and modern methods of advertisement. Um,
So I think I would add, I think the city administrator made a really good point. He used the word protection. And I think that's the question is, where are we with our values here? That, is it something that we want, a vibrant economic development in our community where we can, live and shop and eat at nice restaurants? Or are we, gonna just allow landlords to, okay, well, rent to whomever you want, to Councilmember Johnson's point, that it really doesn't increase, the economic vibrancy, right? And we have retail leakage, right? Our citizens have to go to Issaquah and potentially even Bellevue, right? Because, I mean, there are only so many restaurants here, and you eat there, and after a while, you're tired of eating at the same old place because there's not a lot of diversity in terms of choices. So please continue, sir.
oh, whoa, sorry there. Let me pull that back up. Just a moment. So then we discussed the Ridge, and in downtown, the current requirement is a 75% minimum retail use requirement, and you still have that 120-day minimum vacancy period prior to applying for a retail waiver. So the Planning Commission has spent an extensive amount of time studying and revising these amendments, and ultimately concluded on this recommendation. So the recommendation would be to expand the scope of the amendments to apply to all storefronts facing Center Boulevard Southeast on the Ridge. It would revise the minimum retail percentage to 90% retail uses, 10% non-retail commercial uses, and it would remove the retail waiver process and thereby remove the minimum vacancy period. Similarly, downtown, the scope of the overlay zone has been expanded from just the BR1 zone to also include a portion of Falls Avenue, as the Planning Commission determined was appropriate, and also mirrors the Ridge at a 90% retail use requirement, and then the 10% remaining could be any non-retail use that's currently allowed in the BR1 zone. Similarly, the retail waiver process has been removed and there is no minimum vacancy period. Here's just a
Sorry.
Oh,
yeah,
sorry.
Just, I'm really engrossed here, so just yell at me, please. Councilmember Johnson.
And I thought that, you could correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that the Economic Development Committee had asked for the retail to be 100%. Increased up to that much, and the Planning Commission felt like this kind of split the baby and ended up kind of in the middle at 90.
Yeah, I think at the direction of, I've got a slide towards the back that I could pull up that has the full timeline on it, but I believe it started out as 100%, and then the CD committee back in 2020, early 2024 advised the Economic Development Commission that 100% was too high and that between 75% and 100% was more appropriate. And so given that direction, the Planning Commission arrived at a ratio of 90% and 10% non-retail.
Councilmember Wadden.
Okay, I do recall the 100% being the aspirational piece from the EDC, but I'm not sure that the overlay is the same one we're looking at. And I'm a little bit concerned because there's both residential on Falls as well as retail and the impact that that would have on those particular houses. And again, if we can go back to the overlay,
think you're gonna see
maybe
it.
somebody has better eyes, like somebody in the audience, than me. Thank you, Dory. Because I think it's actually expanded from when the discussion occurred at the EDC.
That's correct.
Okay.
Chair,
Councilmember Johnson?
I believe that what the planning commission landed on, though, is to not include the residentially used buildings that are along Falls, but just the ones that are currently being commercially used. So there's an expansion and then a retraction
Mm.
from the planning commission.
Yeah, there was a pretty substantial, when the planning commission held public hearing for these amendments in October of 2024, there was a pretty substantial public comment because originally the overlay zone was proposed to encompass the entire BR2 zone, which would include quite a bit more of Falls Avenue beyond the hardware store. And I will say, I believe there may be still a residentially used property along Falls in the proposed retail overlay zone. That was the primary concern of the general public, was the fact that residential uses would be incorporated into this overlay zone, and there was concern that it would be a rezone of their property and that the development regulations that they were currently subject to would change. And staff generated a pretty substantial comment response matrix that's attached to this, and I'm happy to go through that with you if you like as well. But I think when we reviewed that with the Planning Commission, their concern was that it'd be converting residential property to a retail use. The reality is that while their concerns are really understandable, because it's kind of an obscure amendment that we're proposing, all of the properties that are to be encompassed in this overlay zone are already zoned as retail property. So if there is a residential use in the area that these amendments are proposed, it's already considered a non-conforming use. It can continue under the Snoqualmie non-conforming use code as it has been since these amendments were enacted, or since this retail zone was established. But that was the primary concern of the public, was how it would affect the residential property. But discussing, oh, sorry.
Councilmember Johnson, or sorry, Councilmember Watt.
Close.
Sorry,
The
Councilmember.
other direction. So it comes back to this, it's a non-conforming use, but if that property should be sold and it's a residence, does that, there's sometimes a question, and this is more of a legal question, of whether those rights pass along to the next owner. And we have that on a property on Railroad Avenue, because I had that inquiry with my other hat as a banker, and that's kind of the gray areas when a property changes ownership, whether those non-conforming rights goes with the property, or does it at that point then change? I don't know.
Typically, as long as the use didn't fall, so there's different, under the Snoqualmie non-conforming use code, there's different criteria for when a non-conforming use loses its non-conforming status. I think that I'm not positive, I could pull it up if we're curious, but I believe that it has to fall out of use for a year. And if it was sold, at least staff's understanding has always been that the non-conforming use rights continue with that property. However, if it was converted to like an office or a retail property, then you would lose the non-conforming status and you couldn't convert it back to a non-conforming residential use.
Councilmember Johnson?
Until the 90% threshold had been met. And then,
That's correct, except that in the BR1 and BR2 zone, ground floor residential uses, I don't believe are, in the BR1 zone, I know that they are not. I believe in the BR2 zone also they are not. So you could convert it back to a residence on the second story, but the ground floor.
follow up, please.
Yeah, in fact, actually in the downtown area, there might be the additional issue of the floodway / floodplain, and I always get those two mixed up as to which one's which. But for having ground floor residential, I think there's some significant restrictions there.
City Administrator Chambliss?
So if you're taking notes, the non-conforming code is 1755-040. And it's too much for me to read and process while I'm sitting here right now. So I encourage you to look at it yourself, and our city attorney will be back next week. If you really need an answer this week, let me know and I can get a pitch hit from another attorney.
Thank you.
It's 1754?
55.
1755-040.
55. That makes more sense.
Yeah, I just, sorry, can you go back? I think it's a slide previous. Okay. So I'm just looking at that 90%. So now we're going, the wording is all storefronts facing Center Boulevard. In this case, 90%. And I'll just kind of stick with that example. So my understanding is there's at least 3 landlords / owners there, maybe more. But I think just from a standpoint of being equitable for the, let's just call it 3 landlords, how would that be enforced? Do you understand my question? So, for example, whatever the math is, one landlord has 2 non-retail locations, and now we're at the 90%.
Yeah.
The other 2 landlords are at 100%. Something happens in the economy, they can't rent the retail, but, well, it's not really equitable because landlord A we're already, together jointly at that threshold.
Mhm.
So how possibly could that be enforced in an equitable way?
Currently, the amendments do not account for any discretion in allowing a waiver from these requirements on the basis of like economics or rental vacancies, basically. It would be, under this amendment, it would be it might shake out that way that maybe one landlord happens to have all of the non-retail commercial uses, but until they turned over and that 90% retail threshold was achieved, there could be no more non-retail commercial uses on the ridge.
Okay.
And it could happen in a way you suggest.
Thank you.
Why did you want me to do it?
Well,
Director Davis, did you have a
thank
question?
you. I just wanted to clarify that it wouldn't really be based on the landlord or the building. It would be based on the entire area. So you could have multiple landlords, multiple buildings within that overlay, and you would be tracking the 90% in that whole overlay regardless of the landlord.
Absolutely, totally hear your point, but I'm just kind of looking at this from a landlord perspective. If there are only 3, or I think there's 4. Do you know how many landlords are there on Center Street? My understanding were there are at least 3, but I could see how this could be problematic under that scenario. City Administrator
To
Chambliss?
talk about the enforcement side of things that I know a lot more about.
Okay,
Typically, it's enforced through building permit applications or business license applications.
okay.
That's normally when we're clued in on what's going on
Mhm.
and a review of the code before a permit gets approved. I can't talk to equity, sorry.
Okay. Councilmember Watt.
And just for clarification, the only time that would have an impact would be the request for a change of use.
Change of use for a tenant improvement.
Right. Okay, tenant improvement, so.
No.
City Administrator Chambliss?
You use the word only, and that's a hard word to go with.
Okay.
There have been times when people go into spaces without notifying the city or obtaining permits
Mhm.
or any of those things, and then they're discovered later.
Right.
That is a time when an action may be taken because they didn't have a legal right to be in there
Okay.
in the first place.
And if I may,
Yes, Councilmember
my
Johnson.
understanding is that ignorance of the law is not a defense from, right?
Correct.
Please continue, sir.
So if there are no more questions with what the amendments that are being proposed, at least those
Right.
details.
I'm sorry, Councilmember Jones.
I just want to make one more thing. I just want to make sure that we got this, that we're all on the same page about that, and I think I even mentioned earlier, but that the planning commission did exclude those residential units along Falls from their expansion of the zone.
That's right.
Fall.
Down, if you can see my cursor, originally this block here, I believe, had been proposed to be incorporated. And then portions of Maple as well. However, the planning commission did revise it to an earlier proposal that they had been considering, which was just Falls Avenue, and then the portion, and then just the parcels containing the hardware store on the other side of the street. I can't recall what the name of it is. You'll notice up here too, the boundary is shrinking slightly. These parcels were incorporated or are proposed to be incorporated into the Snoqualmie River Trail project. They're not zoned for retail uses. They are open space uses. So we're just proposing that they be removed just because it makes sense. And along Center Boulevard here, you can see these are the three intersections that the retail use requirement currently applies to, highlighted in black. The orange box with the white perimeter is the extent of where the amendments would apply. Any storefront facing Center Boulevard Southeast. So in summary, the amendments that are proposed by concerning retail uses that are proposed by the Planning Commission are to expand the downtown historic district retail overlay zone to include all parcels along BR1 and appropriate parcels along Falls Avenue, to remove parcels that are within the overlay zone, the northern portion of the overlay zone that are zoned open space, to expand the retail use requirement from just the corners to all storefronts facing Center Boulevard, and to, within both of these districts, to apply a minimum 90% retail use requirement. The remaining 10% could be either non-retail commercial uses on the ridge, or any use allowed in the BR1 zone downtown. This proposal also removes the retail waiver process altogether. And finally, the Planning Commission proposed, since we're already opening up the development standards for Snoqualmie Ridge 1, they're proposing to incorporate a requirement that no more than 50% of the ground floor windows of a tenant space along Center Boulevard Southeast be covered with an opaque material that would stop you from seeing into the space. And the idea is to encourage a more pedestrian-friendly retail experience where we can actually see into these retail spaces. So in order to enact these amendments, now I'm kind of moving into part 2, where we're discussing the mechanics of how the Snoqualmie Ridge governing documents and the Snoqualmie Municipal Code interact. You've got the citywide municipal code and chapter 1737, which applies specifically downtown. And then on the ridge, you've got the Snoqualmie Ridge 1 mixed use final plan, which is the adopted approval document for Snoqualmie Ridge 1, and which authorizes the Snoqualmie Ridge 1 development standards to regulate land uses and their form up on the ridge. So currently, Snoqualmie Ridge 1 development standards reference the 75% and 75% retail, 25% non-retail ratio in the municipal code. The development standards reference the vacancy period, and the development standards reference the retail waiver application process. So the conditions that we're proposing to modify, or rather remove from the mixed use final plan, are conditions number 4 and number 5. Condition number 4 basically vests so it states the development standards specifically approved with this final plan shall govern future development applications in place of any conflicting standards found elsewhere in the Snoqualmie Municipal Code. Essentially, condition number 4 allows the development standards to supersede the code requirements that are in the Snoqualmie Municipal Code. Condition number 5 states development standards adopted by the city after the date of the final plan, which are different than those approved in the final plan, shall apply to Snoqualmie Ridge only if determined by the city council to be a life safety issue. And so the effect of these two conditions is to vest development on Snoqualmie Ridge to the development regulations that were in place at the time the mixed-use final plan was adopted. So what does that mean for us today? Because it's a lot of gibberish. What it means is that if we apply or if we approve an amendment in the Snoqualmie Municipal Code that would change the retail use requirement downtown from 90 to require 90% retail uses, 10% non-retail uses, and removes the retail waiver process, these references over on the Snoqualmie Ridge development standards no longer will be referencing a current version of the municipal code. Mixed-use final plan conditions 4 and 5 will stop that reference and will reference the prior version of the code that was in place at the time that the mixed-use final plan was adopted. If we repeal those two conditions, mixed-use final plan conditions 4 and 5, it allows these references to pass through to the current iteration of the code that would reflect these retail use amendments containing the 90% retail and 10% non-retail ratio. So in summary, the Planning Commission is recommending that a resolution be approved that would modify the mixed-use final plan for Snoqualmie Ridge 1 to remove conditions 4 and 5, in effect allowing the proposed retail use amendments that are proposed downtown in Chapter 1737 to also apply to retail development up in Snoqualmie Ridge. And that is the extent of my presentation.
City Administrator Chambliss?
Was there any discussion about the retail that's back behind Center Street up there with the Dollar Tree and the Starbucks? And any protections on that building?
There was some discussion about the neighborhood center as a whole, but ultimately the Planning Commission was most interested, or I guess I should say focused in on what it saw as like the walkable components, the walkable retail areas that where a pedestrian-friendly feel is really important and self-reinforcing for a healthy retail district. And so those kind of back of house retail areas ultimately weren't proposed to be included in these amendments for that reason.
Johnson, Councilmember Johnson.
Yeah. I would just note that the city council in their request to the planning commission didn't bring it up either. So maybe we should have, maybe we shouldn't have.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Councilmember Wyden?
I think two things. One is going back to the downtown. I am having some consternation over what the intent of the EDC was, and granted, it's the makeup of the EDC is slightly different now, but the overlay, I can understand shrinking the length on Railroad Avenue and the desire to have more retail over in Falls Avenue will help encourage more retail. I'm just a little bit concerned about this maybe overreaching a little bit as far as you know, the two aspirations. And I think that maybe if we look at the overlay being more limited and slightly different for Falls, if we can land on something that's a little more reasonable. I'm concerned. I'm concerned because I know the intent was to keep Railroad Avenue as much retail as possible. We would like to see more encouragement on Falls. I'm not sure this is the right way of addressing it. And then on the Ridge, you know, again, it's aspirational to have more retail. I'd love to have it. I think a lot of the businesses that have filled those spaces are things that don't bring as much synergies to each other. And I think that's Councilmember Johnson's concern is we need to create synergies. But outside of medical, there are other things that are not medical. And it's going to be, are we throwing the ecosystem off by encouraging those businesses to become, to be sold to similar operator, and we're really not changing anything because again, it comes back to change of use. I'm in a classroom's a classroom, a dance studio is a dance studio, a doctor's office is a doctor's office. Those things are not going to come up that often unless there's a major renovation where there's going to be this change of use that comes up. I'm having some challenges in thinking that we can legislate everything to be different than what it is today. And I just want to throw that word of caution in.
Councilmember Johnson.
Yeah, so with regard to Falls Avenue, it's part of the downtown core. When people go wandering around, they like to wander down Railroad. It's a beautiful street. Then they round the corner and they go, oh, I guess we're done. There's nothing really over there. And then they turn around, they go back to Railroad when there's so much potential for business there. It just doesn't really give that vibe of being for retail. And if it were not rezoned, because we're not rezoning anything, but if it were included in the retail overlay, then that could encourage more of that kind of activity and could really bring a lot of revitalization, make people stay downtown longer than they otherwise would, seeing that it's just one strip and thinking that that's it, when it's not. There is retail on the other side of those buildings. And then with regard to the facilities on Center that are currently medical, even though they're part of the four corners that were supposed to be retail, I think that's a really good point, and we should look into how to ensure that those do become the things that they are supposed to be, that they were always intended to be. So I'm not sure if that necessarily has to go straight back to Planning Commission or not, but I think we have maybe some more gelling to do in this committee, and then we might actually come up with a bit of a work order for the Planning Commission to go back and look at a few of these items, if that's what's needed. Another thing that came up was the question about retail, and is what is currently defined in the code as retail, what really feels appropriate.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I guess those are the questions.
Madam Mayor, did you have a question or a comment?
Well, yeah, I have a question. I think the whole purpose of looking at this and going to the 90% was to encourage retail and restaurants so that when you're downtown, for instance, you can come into Carousel and then you go to Chickadee and to a lot of different places, right? Instead of if you have
Both sides of the ice cream.
both sides of the ice cream, right? And then you go around the other side. And so, and the goal would be on Falls Avenue to make it more of a thriving retail area. So if people are down strolling around, it's great to go there, and not necessarily to see the doctor in the same area, right? Or there's definitely needs to be places for where the doctors are, but that could be upstairs, for instance. You'd still have them in the retail area, but I think it allows upstairs for service coverage. Anyway, so that's been our goals, right? As council we need to increase the amount of sales tax. We're not reliable as much on property tax. And so we also need, business retention and kind of a thriving area. So that's what we've been working towards. So.
Yeah, I'll just make the point. I think that's an excellent point, Madam Mayor. And I think with, other sections of our city government, what we're doing in the way of, drawing visitors to our beautiful city, that complements what we're doing for bringing in, like I said, visitors very well. So I think if we could revitalize that, if I can use that word, you know, in a retail space, that would bode well. Sorry, I'm gonna go to, Director Davis.
Thank you. In the couple of meetings that I was able to attend upon starting here, I do recall that, you know, there was a lot of discussion around activating Falls Avenue and making that a more vibrant block, you know, that people would, you know, walk up Railroad, do their shopping, as the mayor implied, and then, you know, go around to the back where we've got other restaurants, the brewery, the tequila bar, you know, there's lots of restaurants in the back that we felt like that Falls Avenue is kind of screaming for us to activate that and get more lighting back there. And so that was, I think, the whole intention of trying to include that area back there to make it a big retail block, so to speak, and not just a retail strip.
Good point. Councilmember Johnson. You're done? You're good? Okay. Any other questions? Okay.
Next steps.
Yep. I think next steps, I think, you know, my thought is the definition of retail. And I don't know if that's something that we want to tackle at the committee level, or if that's something that we may want to send back to the planning commission and have the planning commission look at that. I'm open to ideas. Councilmember Johnson?
So another possibility is that perhaps some of those definitions could be something that we could update as kind of a second phase of this, that we could do this aspect of the project, get some of these protections in place for retail, and amend the code, or amend the mixed-use final plan so that the code applies to it as it's updated. And then kind of like as kind of a second step, we go, okay, so now that we've taken this, now planning commission, why don't you take a harder look at, you know, what really is the retail? And then kind of come back to us with a set of that, because that could take some time. And yeah, I really would like to get this package going for a local retail. They've been hurting quite a bit,
Yeah.
and we've been hearing from our local businesses that they're hurting, and I think that this could really help them out.
And I'll further that point, not, I've been hearing from our local businesses, but also from our residents that, you know, this is a very big ask as well. Councilmember Wadden?
Yeah, just one more point, and that's going back to the downtown overlay. I would feel more comfortable in the overlay that includes only those properties that have been in retail or commercial use for the last 5 years or more, that there's a history on, and carving out those few houses that may be in that overlay, which are not that many. But just looking at the overlay, I think there's a few residents that are kind of in between, that may be retail, they may be residential, and we definitely need residential everywhere. So unless I'm misinterpreting the map.
So Councilmember Wadden, I just want to be clear. Are you referring to the block, I guess that'd be west of River Street back to King Street?
From River Street
Back to-
over to the river, there's a few houses, unless I'm misinterpreting the map overlay, and then I stand corrected.
Can we go back to the overlay map, please?
Then Director Davis may want to help educate me.
Either one of us.
Yep. So I'll go to City Administrator Chambliss first, and then back to you, Councilmember Johnson.
Okay.
My recommendation is give us another shot at the map. We can do better. 'Cause
Okay.
that's really hard to, the resolution on that is poor.
Okay.
Okay.
Maybe we need to give you 3 maps so you can see the detail, but we can do better than that.
More
So
details always
give us-
Thank you.
Councilmember Johnson.
So I'm pretty sure, I'll get up. I am pretty sure the planning commission had intended for it to actually stop somewhere around here, satisfying, I believe, Councilmember Wadden's concern. I think that that was their intent, and we could double check if we need to. But that, this would not actually go in their final recommendation all the way to the river. But it was gonna stop like, I think it was a little bit past mid-block, but essentially, yeah, to where those businesses are now, that are kind of further up Falls.
Thank you, Councilmember Johnson.
We can do
I
better.
believe,
Okay.
Commissioner Lambert brought that up.
I have a question. Will we have City Attorney Burke here for the next CD committee meeting? Just around the non-conforming piece, the 17.55. I think there's some questions on there.
Yes, she's away at conference this week.
Okay, okay. Thank you. Councilmember Johnson?
Okay, so my recommendation then is that let's give this one more crank of the wheel before we send it on to council.
Mhm.
And let's consider other things that we would like the planning commission to do as a separate action. And then perhaps we can move forward confidently with this to council at the meeting after the next
Yeah,
one.
so the last meeting potentially in May. Okay. And like I said, there are some questions around the non-conforming
First meeting in May.
piece. Yeah, oh, today's the 21st. Yeah, I guess it would be the first, yeah. The
Yeah.
first council meeting in May. Okay.
Let's try to target that.
So, yeah, I think we just, table the discussion. Director Davis, did you have a comment?
Well, I just wanted to mention, and I think it will be good to have the city attorney weigh in, but it was my understanding that if you had a single-family residential unit and you sold it, you could keep it a single-family home as long as you didn't try to enlarge it or expand it. So the single family could stay that way unless they sold it, and then somebody would have the opportunity to convert that to retail on the bottom and housing above.
Councilmember Johnson?
And actually, I just realized that we do have the chair, oh no, former chair at the time that they were working on this at the planning commission. And if you don't mind me putting you on the spot, is my memory right that it was just the half of Falls? Okay, just want to make sure.
So that, the half of Falls west of,
North.
yeah, I guess it'd be west of, what is that? King, west, it's okay. Okay.
Mid-block-ish, something like
So the map that's shown is not correct from what was recommended by the planning commission? Is that what I'm hearing?
That's correct.
May
It's
have
an error.
bled.
Okay.
Okay, we'll double check on that. How about that?
Sounds good. Sounds good. Okay, so in light of the time planning commission meeting coming up, we'll end a discussion here. So, in the other agenda item, let's see here, sorry.
Move
No,
to
it's
adjourn.
just-
Well, hang
Yeah.
on. Yeah, I just want to call it out real quickly. So the Agenda Bill 25-036, the resolution amending SR1 mixed use final plan is a complement. So we'll continue the discussion at our next community development meeting. And
That could be consent, don't you think?
I'm sorry.
Kidding.
Okay. Okay, so that brings us to the end of our meeting. If there's no further business to come before this committee, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved?
Second.
Okay, we are adjourned at 6:54.